Have you heard of this term, quiet quitting? It's been sort of a trending topic over the last number of months, and it's basically born out of this idea that in a work situation, you're feeling sort of undervalued, underappreciated, and you start to cut back quietly. You're like, you know what, I'm not gonna go the extra mile anymore. You're not gonna put in any extra effort, maybe for the greater good of the team, but you know what, this is what they've hired me to do, this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm not gonna go any further. And I think we've been in these situations, where we feel undervalued and underappreciated. But I think the idea of this quiet quitting, this sort of cutting back, this idea of not having the back of the team or maybe not looking forward with a bigger vision, it can be a really dangerous place to sit in. And when I thought more about this idea of quiet quitting, I don't think it only happens in the workplace. I actually think it can happen in our relationships as well. Again, where we're sitting in situations where maybe we're in a relationship where we feel undervalued or underappreciated. And so we start to cut back and we're saying, you know what, my needs aren't being met here. I'm feeling undervalued, underappreciated, overworked, whatever that is in this moment. And I say, you know what, I'm going to elevate my own needs above the needs of others, above the needs of those around us. And you know what, there are time and a place for that, but it's just the perspective that you're coming from. And I think that really can make a difference. I had this opportunity over the last couple of months to be part of a couple of weddings this year, one of them of which I was the master of ceremonies, which is fun and challenging and a whole adventure. But at both these weddings, they played this game that is affectionately called the shoe game. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but what happens is you get the bride and groom, you're at the reception, everybody's having a great time, and you get them up in front of everybody, and you sit them down, and you sit them back to back so they can't see each other, and they each take one of each other's shoes. So in the right hand, they've got the bride's shoe, and in the left hand, they got the groom's shoe. And then the master of ceremonies will ask them a series of questions. Who's the better cook, or who's going to be the one that's responsible to take out the garbage, or who's going to change more diapers, or who's better with their finances, or who's going to manage their finances better. It's funny to see, they put up the shoe of the person they believe in the relationship is the one that is better at that or is going to be responsible for that in the marriage coming forward. And it's really funny when, the couple disagrees and everyone laughs. But you start to see we're sort of drawing lines of like, well, this is what he's going to do in the marriage, or this is what she's going to do in the marriage. And it starts to sort of solidify this idea in our mind that when we start a relationship or are in a relationship, whether that could be a work relationship between yourself and an employer, it could be in a romantic relationship with you, your spouse, or your partner, we have this idea that we want it to be equitable and we want it to be fair. Like if I bring this to the table, then you should be bringing the other side of the table. And you're sort of starting to draw these lines in a relationship of this should be a fair relationship. But if you've been married or in a long-term relationship, that's not how it works, right? Life doesn't really work that way in relationships, and I don't believe it works that way in our work relationships or work situations either. So when I heard about this idea of quiet quitting, to me it was like someone sitting there going, you know what, this isn't fair. And then I thought, well, hey, you know what, guess what? Life isn't fair. And if you're going to make decisions based upon things being fair, you're going to find yourself in a really tricky spot really quickly, right? And it's not going to give you opportunities to actually step forward into what God wants you to do because you're always looking for fair relationships. You're always looking for fair agreements. Sometimes you have to be willing to go that extra mile. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a touchy topic. If you're in a situation where there's abuse in a relationship or anything like that, that's not what we're talking about. Let's take that off the table. But sometimes you got to be willing to put in a little bit of extra effort in order to be able to help grow the vision, help grow the team, help grow the relationship because somebody's made a mistake or something's not working and the other partner's fallen down. I know in my marriage, in my relationship, if my wife and I are trying to treat each other equitably or trying to be fair, that's going to be a disaster because I continue to make mistakes and I need her to cover, right? And we need to be able to cover for each other and have each other's back and know that regardless of the mistake that we might make, we've got each other's back, and that's how that relationship works. We come together and we do that. Now, is it always going to be that way in a work situation or in an employment and job situation? Not necessarily, but if you're combined and engaged in that role, going that extra mile is actually going to open up way more opportunities for you in the future, right? And I believe that you want more opportunities for impact. That means you're going to need to go the extra mile sometimes before you're quote unquote paid for it or before it's in your job description. You get to go that extra mile because that's what opens up those opportunities. Dr. Henry Cloud is an author and he shares this story of a business deal that he was putting together, and he was sort of coming to the end of this deal. It was almost put together and he was going to have lunch with his new potential partner, and they sat down and they had lunch, and during that discussion the new potential partner said something along the lines of basically, you know what, I'm excited about this relationship, this partnership that we're entering into, and you know what, if you treat me well, I'll treat you well, but if you don't treat me well, I can promise you I'll be right there coming back at you and not treat you well. If you take advantage of me, expect that I'm basically going to come back at you. And Dr. Cloud said, you know what, this is not the deal for me. That is not what I'm looking for, because we're all going to make mistakes, and when you enter into a partnership or a relationship or any type type of agreement like that, what you're looking for is not fair. You're looking for somebody that's going to work with you so you can cover each other, play to each other's strengths, and then actually grow into something greater than just the sum of its parts. That's what, a relationship is. It's greater than just the sum of its parts. It's why that partnership in your employment exists, is because you bring value to the table towards the goal of the organization. And so he walked away from that business deal. He walked away from that business relationship, and it really struck me. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Would I have done the same thing? I don't know, but I'd like to be able to learn for that and recognize that I'm not looking for fair. I'm looking for people that got my back. I'm looking for people that I can go the extra mile for and actually build something that's going to be greater, go into something that's going to be greater and have greater impact because we're in partnership together. Okay, so if you're sitting there and you're going, but what do I do in those moments where I'm feeling frustrated, where I'm feeling undervalued and underappreciated, and I feel like that I'm being tread on? You don't want to be a doormat, right? But what do you do? Well, the first thing I would recommend is check your values. Do you understand where your values are, where they are, and where they sit in your calendar? Are they on your calendar, like we talked about in a previous video? We're saying, hey, you know what? I value time with my family, and this is how that shows up in my calendar. I value, this purpose that God's put into my life to write a book or to have this impact or to create in this space. That is a part of my life. And if those values are being tread on based on, overworked or whatever it is, you got to look at that and make sure that you've got those values clearly laid out. You understand where they are, and, are your values being stamped on or stepped on because of your current situation? Are you aware of your values? And this carries right on with that discussion. The second thing I would recommend is check your boundaries. I find that often if I'm in a situation where I feel that I'm being undervalued or underappreciated, I haven't been able to properly communicate my boundaries, whether that be in a work situation or it might be even in a partner-spouse relationship, but I haven't properly communicated my boundaries that this is what's important to me, what I believe God's calling me to in my life, and this is how I want to be able to live that out, right? So you know what? If it's really important to me, and it is, that I get home to have dinner with my family every day, and I set up my work life around that, that means that, if you ask me to stay late to take care of something one time, okay, but if this is, going to be an ongoing thing, that doesn't fit with my values of family. That doesn't fit with the value of me raising my daughters, right? So those can be some challenging conversations, especially if those boundaries haven't been set in the first place. But they're conversations that you need to be able to have. It's going to actually allow the people that you work with in the partnership to better understand you, to be able to better communicate so you can better work together towards the desired goals and outcomes of the organization. And the third point I'd recommend follows right along this point, but just recognizing what relationships are you going to commit to. Like I recognize my relationship with my wife is one of my priority commitments. My relationship with Jesus Christ is one of my priority commitments. And I don't expect that relationship to be a fair commitment, a 50-50 relationship. This is a 100-100 relationship. That means I'm bringing 100% of myself to the equation, regardless of if she's having an off day or what that is. I know that Jesus brings more than 100% to the equation in my relationship because I make so many mistakes, and he's always there. Right? He's always there for me. And my wife is always there for me. Even if I make a mistake, she's always there. She's always got my back. We're always willing to cover for each other. You got to be able to take that fairness, that idea of fairness off the table and say, okay, well, here's what I'm going to commit to. Here's what I'm willing to commit to. And when I commit to it, I'm going to commit in all the way. And if you find yourself in that situation where you are really frustrated in your work and maybe you just really don't enjoy the day-to-day, take a hard look at it and look at it. Is this where you're supposed to be? Is this where you believe God wants you to be in this moment? Pray into that. But also recognize in the big picture, look big picture, is it putting food on your table and providing for your family? Does it open up opportunities for you to pour time, effort, and finances, energy, whatever it is, into the purpose that God has called you to? And so therefore, you get the opportunity to work in that job because it opens up all these other opportunities. Make sure you're looking at the big picture. Don't always get stuck in the day-to-day and the moment-to-moment, right? Because that can be really tedious. That can really create a challenge for you if that's what your mindset is focused on, if that's what you're circling around, and you're thinking that this isn't fair, but you might be missing the bigger picture of what God wants to do in and through you. In my experience, the greatest opportunities I have had have come from working in organizations where I can bring more than is expected, where I can work smarter, where I can bring value to the table and actually provide that to the organization over the long term. And does that mean you're putting in effort that maybe you're not quote unquote being paid for or what's not in your job description? Absolutely, but that's how you get recognized. That's how opportunities open up for you to go further, to have more of an impact. So today I want to leave you with a verse from the Bible in Colossians 3 verses 23 and 24, where it says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord and not for human masters. Remember that. And I think keeping that mindset, keeping that perspective, even when I get frustrated, even if I feel undervalued or underappreciated, it says in those verses, that my reward is coming from Him, not from those that are here on this earth. And so if you can keep that perspective, keep a picture of, this is the direction that God wants me to be working towards. This is what he wants me to be sowing into. Then even on those times or periods of time where you're feeling frustrated or less engaged, you know that you're working to something that is so much bigger. You're sowing into something that is so much bigger than you. So I hope you have an absolutely blessed rest of your day. I hope this encourages you, and I look forward to connecting with you again next week.